The difference that we see is the land. We don't have the type of land availability. We're a lot more people condensed. And I've started a lot of my work in my year here with Extension has been in infant structure because we have a lot of ex-dairymen who are transitioning into the beef world, and a dairy animal and a beef animal are quite different. And to teach people that can be somewhat of a challenge because they have the infrastructure for dairy, but it doesn't quite work for our beef, or they don't, headlocks versus a squeeze chute, and the safety for you and for the animals, and what are the end goals. So we've been working and educating that a lot, and that's been something I have really loved because it's some of the basics, but the type of people that you get to work with in this part from transitioning into beef animals, because you kind of get to watch people fall in love with that beef animal.
Welcome to the Beef Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Brandy Buzzard, and it's my pleasure to bring you the trending issues and topics with the best and brightest minds of the beef industry. Today, we are joined by Taylor Zahn, extensive beef educator at Penn State University. Taylor earned her bachelor's degree from North Dakota State University in Animal Sciences and her master's degree in education from Colorado State University. She works with Pennsylvania beef producers to solve their problems and address their concerns, and we are excited to have her on the podcast today. Welcome to the podcast, Taylor.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
How are you today? How are things in Pennsylvania?
They're good. We finally are getting some fall weather that has come with a lot of rain. So.
Oh, I'm very jealous. We are having kind of fall weather, but have not gotten the rain that's associated with it. So pretty jealous that you have that right now. Well, to get started, we'll jump right in. Can you tell us about how you got involved in the beef industry and your career path so far? Just catch us up. Some of us may not know as much about you, so catch us up on things.
Yeah, absolutely. While I was in undergrad at North Dakota State, I am originally from North Dakota. It was my home, and I got into animal science, but I only grew up on a hobby farm and had a little bit of random pets, as I would call them. And so I was very new to understanding industry. And I got a job at one of the university farms and ended up just falling in love with the beef. And from then on, that was my mission, was I wanted to have my own cattle one day. I was going to have a production. Unfortunately, I didn't come from a cattle family, so I needed to make sure that I made enough money to get into the cattle business. So I actually started to pursue poultry, because there's a little bit more money in the poultry industry in order to pay for my cattle at home. Mm-hmm. And once I did that, I got into a program called the Midwest Poultry Consortium, and that is a scholarship program. At the time, it was in Madison, Wisconsin, and it's a summer-long program where they condense poultry classes, and you're able to transfer those credits back to your undergrad university to help graduate earlier. And the hope is that these poultry classes, you stay in the poultry industry. And I shouldn't say unfortunately. I actually met my husband in that program.
Okay, cool.
He's from Mizzou, Oklahoma, and he graduated before me and got into the poultry industry. So with biosecurity, that took me out of that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you can't both do it, so.
Yeah, we can't both do it. But funny enough, we actually both had the same idea, was that we both were pursuing poultry in order to buy cattle. Yeah. And because that's where our hearts were. And I feel like I actually got lucky in the whole deal, because he gets to work with birds, but I get to go back to my true love, which is cattle, and pursue that. And so coming out of undergrad, I took a job in Iowa managing about a 300 head limousine Angus production. And after about a year of working there, fresh out of college, I quickly realized that managing somebody else's large herd took a lot of time away from myself and maybe potentially building my own. And I decided to go back to school, but I didn't know what for. So I had actually called my undergrad advisor and said, hey, I'm thinking about going back to school, but I don't know what I should do. And she laughed at me because I swore up and down I was never, ever going back to school. Grad school was not an option. I am happy to go, just be done. And she's like, I knew this day would come. Oh, that's funny. Yeah. So thankfully, we kind of came, she told me a little bit more about extension and some different programs that she's heard of. So I applied to Colorado State online for their extension education program and ended up getting in right when COVID started.
Oh, wow.
And at the same time, I want to believe it was the same week, actually, at the time it was my boyfriend, his job asked us to move to Maryland for his work. And COVID had just started. I just got into grad school. Felt like just a lot changing and happening. But for his career, we decided to move out to the East Coast, and I was going to start grad school online, and we'd see where everything would take us. And we didn't move to Maryland. We lived just on the other side of the border in Pennsylvania. And I finished my master's online during COVID and did some contract work with the Cattlemen's Association. And made connections there, which is kind of how I heard about the job with Penn State Extension when it opened in my area, because I had made some friends that were in Extension and have been here for just over a year now.
We have a time and labor-saving product for you. Beef and Dairy Agri-Slat by Healthy Farms is your solution. No more lugging jugs around the barn every month. With Beef and Dairy Agri-Slat, you simply drop the slat through the floor twice a year, and it works to break down solids, reduces crusting and forming. To learn more, visit myhealthyfarms.com.
Very cool. That is quite the path. It's funny that you say, or it's interesting that you say, not funny, but it's interesting you say you grew up on a hobby farm because and now you're involved in beef production and have cows. And the same for me, I grew up on what you call a hobby ranch. We had 4-H animals and things like that. And I'm now also involved in beef production. What, you call them pets. What animals did you grow up with on your family's hobby farm?
I would say hobby farm. We had mostly poultry, actually. We probably butchered about 600 of our own broilers. Oh, wow. Okay. We had, 75 or so hens, collected eggs. I had the ducks and geese, some goats, the rabbit, things that keep the kids occupied.
Yeah. That's not a small hobby farm. That's a big hobby. That's a big hobby farm. 600 birds to butcher every year. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Well, that is really interesting. So, you said your husband is from Missouri? Is that what you said? Or Oklahoma?
He's from Oklahoma, but he's a Mizzou grad.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. All right. So that is, like I said, that was quite the path and the journey for you. You grew up in North Dakota and then you managed that large herd for some other people. Has there been, tell us a little bit about the learning curve from, North Dakota beef and managing that type of operation. And then now you're in Pennsylvania. I imagine those are very different beef, raising beef in a different way or different beef operations. Can you tell us about that learning curve a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. In the Midwest, there's a lot of land. And the herds generally are just larger. So when we came out here, one of the things that I noticed was some of the connections I made. The joke was that if your cattle get out, you'll never catch them. So let them go. And I was like, I'm from North Dakota. What we say is if your dog runs away, you're watching it for 2 weeks running because it's so flat. It's so, there's no trees, nothing out there. Now I'm getting told you can't get your cattle back. And what I realized was nobody has fencing. Everybody they're cropping right up to the road. There's no shoulders.
Oh, okay.
And so if your cattle get out, there's just no fencing to kind of corral them. They're free. And what a lot of people don't know either about Pennsylvania is we actually have 2 major packing plants here in the state. And we get a lot of our backgrounding from in Virginia, and then our cow calves and feedlots come out here. But the 2 different parts of Pennsylvania is out in Lancaster, the east, we have, we like to say typically more of our feedlot area, whereas the west, you're getting a lot more hillier, and it's our cow calf. The difference that we see is the land. We don't have the type of land availability. We're a lot more people condensed. And I've started a lot of my work in my year here with Extension has been in infrastructure, because we have a lot of ex-dairymen who are transitioning into the beef world, and a dairy animal and a beef animal are quite different. And to teach people that can be somewhat of a challenge because they have the infrastructure for dairy, but it doesn't quite work for our beef, or they don't, headlocks versus a squeeze chute, and the safety for you and for the animals, and what are the end goals. So we've been working and educating that a lot, and that's been something I have really loved, because it's some of the basics, but the type of people that you get to work with in this part from transitioning into beef animals, because you kind of get to watch people fall in love with that beef animal. And that's what happened to me when I was an undergrad, was I got to work with them and I fell in love with them and their production. And it's just been a really fun experience so far.
Right. So you mentioned a little bit about that transition, and I want to get to that in a second. But I'm sorry, I'm still on the whole, like, if your cows get out,
I know.
Don't get them back. I've been to Pennsylvania a couple times. I mean, I'm sorry, forgive me for like being so logistically focused, but like, they got to get them back somehow. Somebody's going to get them, right? Like, yeah,
they will. But it's not, people aren't on horseback here. And it will take, if you have the 4-wheelers, corralling them back. And not luckily, our producers just don't have that large of herds either. And so you're not talking about 100 plus. I think, the average herd here is about 80. And so when they get out, you can get them. It's just going to take a bit more, maybe getting some gates, to work them through and stuff like that. But they're gonna get a ways out.
Again, forgive me, because I've never raised beef or lived in raised beef in Pennsylvania or had cattle in Pennsylvania. I've only been to there twice. But because there are higher, like a more concentrated population in Pennsylvania, and I'm just wondering, like, on average, are the cattle herds there just like a bit more docile because they're used to being like in smaller spaces where, they're not running on 500, 600, 700 acre pastures. They're in, I'm assuming, smaller pastures. So are they a little bit more docile in general? Is that something that you've noticed, or is that a misnomer that I am accidentally perpetuating?
I would say mostly yes. Kind of depends, right? That's the university answer. It depends, because they have smaller herds. Due to the smaller herds, though, cattle ranching is not a full-time job. And out here, we don't see that. It's their job. They can only feed, before work or after work, and managing that. And as an educator too, all of our programs are pretty much always nighttime weekend programs, because that's when our audience is home off of work, because it's not a full-time job out here. And so their cattle typically are closer to home because they don't have the time to go out to the next pastures. But I will say too, we are challenged sometimes on the educator side of educating genetics and what genetics can really do to the docility and your herd itself too. So educating that part, sometimes we feel like we are lagging behind than in the Midwest when it comes to that stuff.
Okay, that's fair. I mean, obviously, docility can come from genetically, but also it is genetic, but is also can come from handling and proximity. So I just was very curious about that, because cattle that are running on 1,000 acres are probably not going to see people as often as cattle that are on 50 acres or something like that. So it just was my curiosity getting the best of me there.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to get back. You brought this up. You talked about how a lot of producers are transitioning from dairy to beef, and there's some, there are associated actions with that. So first I want to ask, can you provide insight into like why that is happening? Like, what reason there is, or, what are your thoughts on that?
As somebody who's on the beef side, I don't want to speak for a dairyman, but they are seeing a lot of just hardship in their industry and making money. And honestly, also the time it takes in the dairy industry. You're really locked down to your farm. But once you're in ag, a lot of people want to stay in it. They love it. Their heart's in it. So they're looking for alternatives of how can I stay in business, but a different business.
Right.
So we're seeing them transition to beef, thinking that, it's not milking 3 times a day. It's, how can I fatten them? I've got this much space. And so we're seeing a lot of people interested in fat cattle, and how can they maybe even backgrounding and things like that with our 2-packers in the state. And so we're doing a lot of education in that, and working with JBS and even Tyson and what they're looking for and how we can get cattle local to our packing plants.
Right. I imagine sourcing is it's a crucial topic. So I imagine that's something you talk about a lot. All right. And then so the next question related to this is, because you talked about this earlier, is the infrastructure. Like a dairy barn, imagine has to be retrofitted for beef cattle. I don't know. Again, I don't live in Pennsylvania. Is there a lot of like semi-confined like people raising beef in a semi-confined way, that they're in a barn a few months a year or something like that? Like, can you speak a bit to that? Because some of our listeners may not have any experience with cattle or, cows in confinement or in semi-confinement. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. We had our local Pennsylvania Cattlemen's Association had their field day this last summer up in Mercer County, and they went to a farm that I want to say milked 250 cows and have transitioned the entire farm to feeding cattle. And so they worked with an engineer and retrofitted their dairy barns to feed cattle and fatten them. And then they have a cow calf as well. And they have some pasture in the next county over. And in the winter, they come back to one of their old dairy facilities and house them for the winter. So every production is different, and you got to find what works for you, as long as you are working with what's best for the animal and meeting all of their needs and getting the best out of them and keeping everybody safe. But in our buildings, I think one of the reasons that this topic really sparked home for me too was when I came out here and started going to people's farms, especially in my area of Pennsylvania. A lot of people had these things called bank barns, and I didn't know what they were. And I was like, a bank barn, okay. And everybody had one, and I just didn't get it. And come to find out is that you're building a barn that's on a hill, a bank, and the bottom part of, you can drive up to the top half, and then on the other side of the hill, you have you can put animals. It makes total sense, and these barns are like 100+ years old. I'm just, again, from North Dakota. We don't have banks. We don't have hills. So
yeah, that makes sense. I'm looking up bank barn right now because I want to see a picture of this. You described it really well, but I also want to see a picture of it. I was like on the edge of my seat waiting for you to please tell us what this is. So anyway, go ahead.
And so a lot of people have these old barns and they want to put cattle in them. They want to fatten up a few head. They want to do this or that. But it comes with challenges when you have a building that old, or the square footage of it. How can you best make a feed alley for these cattle and things like that? So we've been working with ag engineers and also my livestock team of just getting information of how can you fit some of these old buildings that we have in Pennsylvania to put cattle in and meet their needs. So bank barn has definitely been one of our biggest calls that we have people ask us, can you come out and see my bank barn and throw some ideas? I have these ideas I want to toss at you, and how can we meet these cattle's needs to put cattle in here?
I think that is fascinating. I imagine there's a point of like insulation also to some as a factor of that. So for our listeners, if you're not kind of grasping what Taylor's describing, a bank barn is basically like if you live in a house where like you have a walkout basement, like that's a bank barn basically, except, the bottom part of it is a barn part. So I'm just looking at some pictures and I Googled bank barn, Pennsylvania, so I can see specifically. And they're really beautiful. Like the ones that are showing up are really, really beautiful. So I think that makes perfect sense. Like you're using the land there to help you achieve your goals. It's got a good amount of insulation. We have dugouts here. Like some people live in dugout houses or like half dugout house here in Kansas. And so those homes are cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter. So it just makes total sense to have a barn like that. So, but I can imagine how you like not knowing what that is and you're supposed to help people with it, that is definitely could have provided some challenges for you.
I think too, what I tell people a lot is the amount of land that we have here to do things with is limited. Whereas I feel my experience in the Midwest was, if you needed some more land, you're just kind of watching the market to see what you can buy or who you can rent from. And that's not always the case here. So also, if you needed a barn, you could build one. Or it was more of an option to build one because you had the land to do it or the space to do it. And here they don't. And so they're really trying to use what they already have or make it fit in what they have, which can come up with some challenges. And that's why we always piggyback with our engineers on our Penn State extension teams. Yeah,
I mean, again, it's just we all have challenges, right? Based on beef production. They're just different based on where you're at. And Pennsylvania is not this way, but I always like when I go to a big city and I see them like building a new building in a tight space. And it amazes me like how they get the cranes and stuff in like that. And I know it's not to that extent in Pennsylvania, but there are some challenges if you're going to build something new with, you only have this much land. And so it just goes to speak that we all have challenges, but they are different, but we're all like, quote unquote, fighting the same fight. I want to change tack just a little bit because I want to make sure we get to this. You had mentioned in our prep that you are, passionate about like people finding their career path or like finding their way in agriculture to the career that, really calls to them. So, can you speak more about that, whether it be in animal science or ag in general, just kind of like your thoughts on that? Because you have taken, your career path has changed and you're ultimately very happy with what you're doing, but it has changed a bit. So maybe you could just kind of provide your insight on that for us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been so fun. I am almost 28 years old and my career path has changed already so much from undergrad to deciding to go to grad school to managing a large herd to now into the education part. And I want to take this moment to thank NDSU's Beef Cattle Research Complex and my managers there. And that's where I worked as an undergrad student. And they gave me the opportunity to really be a part of research, but also I always loved being in front of people. And they let me do a lot of tours and teach some of our 100 level classes when I was a senior. And I think that's where I really kind of sparked this education part for me. And coming back now, there are so many opportunities in animal science that I didn't know when I wasn't even starting in undergrad, and all of the different possibilities in different animal systems, or the science and the fun stuff of genetics and reproduction. And there's so many different possibilities out there. And I wish that we did a better job of promoting ourselves. And in this last year, I actually got asked to be a part of to speak for a Girls in STEM, which is a high school program. Right. And I just remember thinking, like, STEM, that's not me. Like, I don't do math. I don't do all this stuff. And
you do.
I do. Yeah. And I just remember getting really nervous while this talking event was coming up. And then I just realized, I remember Googling, okay, what does STEM, because I'm thinking, has this changed since I was in high school too? And I Googled, what does STEM mean? And I'm like, science. Well, yeah, I guess I do science all the time. Yeah. You know, whether it's reproduction, it's genetics, it's nutrition. I mean, it's endless. Meat science. And then I all of a sudden felt really prepared. I'm like, oh, I'm going to catch them off guard with this. So, because I walked in there, and here I want to say we had about 50 high school girls that were from the area. And a lot of them came in for engineering, for different mathematics. And here I come with animal science. And out of all those girls, I had one who was considering vet school. Uh-huh. And isn't that the story, though? A lot of girls go into college thinking I shouldn't say girls, boys too, maybe going into vet school just to be open, have their eyes open to what animal science and the different possibilities are. And they change directions in their career. And after I talked to that girl who was interested in vet school, she's like, I didn't realize there was a whole nother aspect to it all. And that just kind of grew this fire in me too. And the person who planned this entire event has asked me to come back multiple times now, because it just opened their eyes to a whole new world that they didn't know. And that made me feel really good, because I wish that I had somebody who told me a little bit more about animal science, because I had this passion growing up on a hobby farm, but I thought that maybe the only path there was vet or vet tech. And when I started my animal science program at NDSU, I remember my advisor asking me, you know, do you want to go into the management side? Do you want to go into the nutrition side? And all these different possibilities. And I was like, oh, I don't know. Can I just take a few classes and see where it goes? And you really learn what your passions are in that. And I learned that I loved helping people, and I got to be a TA. I learned reproduction is my jam. Genetics, not so much.
Yeah. You mentioned this, like, about you were going to go to the event, and everybody wants to go into vet school, right? When they leave their community. I think, honestly, it's because, like, as we're growing up, I'm thinking about, because I was pre-vet for a little bit, and then I didn't want to do that anymore. And so, because I discovered another path. And I think it's because, like, when we're growing up and you think about the ag professionals that you're exposed to, even if you live in, like, I live in a rural community where a lot of people work in agriculture. But even so, like, there are farmers and ranchers where I live, and there's the veterinarian. And, like, if I'm a young kid, like, I don't know that I know other people that work in agriculture and what they do, right? Like, I see the farmers and ranchers, and I know there's the vet, but, like, maybe, and I know that there's the man that and his family that own like the feed store and stuff like that. But I don't know that like the guys that work at the grain elevator maybe have a degree in like grain processing. Like, I don't know, or grain, I don't know what you would call the degree, grain science. I don't know. I don't know that the people who like that the feed that is delivered to buy from the elevator is formulated by a nutritionist. Like,
Right.
There's so many things, even living in a rural community, that we like as you're growing up, you don't see those people in action. That, yeah, it makes sense why everybody goes in to wants to be pre-vet or an ag. I guess the other one they see is like an ag ed teacher. So they, vet, ag ed teacher, own a feed store, that kind of stuff. Like, you don't as growing up, we don't realize like that there is education and preparation that goes into those careers, and you can do those because you're just not exposed to it. So bravo to the people that planned that program and have brought you in. That's great. And thank you from one woman in STEM to another for like going and representing that. That's amazing. I'm so glad that you get to fill that role for people and help people find their career path like that.
And it's not, I'm trying to take him away from vet school or anyway either. My sister-in-law, actually, my husband and his sisters, they were from Tulsa. They're not from a ag family at all. But my husband went into ag, and my sister-in-law, I remember her very first year of college, she decided to go to Oklahoma State, and her second semester was sent home due to COVID. And university closed down, and that was, your first year, you're really doing a lot of generals. Well, online college, she didn't like it, and she ended up removing herself from university for a year or two because she didn't know what she wanted to do, and COVID was still happening. And I remember her calling and saying, "Hey, I'm interested in being a vet tech. What can you tell me about it? Or do you know anything?" Because I too, in my first year of college, I worked at a vet as a vet assistant, feeling out, is this maybe a job I want to do? Quickly realized vet tech was not my jam either. Right. Which had me exploring into animal science. But so I talked to her about it, and, we talked about whether she wanted to get a 2-year versus a 4-year, small animal versus large animal, and what different possibilities she could look at. And she ended up sticking with the small animal, and she got her first job being a vet assistant and absolutely loving it. And now she's going in to get a specialty in anesthesiologist. And for all that, she did end up going back and finishing not only vet tech, but got her animal science degree from Oklahoma State. And I'm so proud of her. And felt very grateful that she even reached out to me to ask some questions. And it's been really fun to see her grow in that area too. And I'm glad it worked out for her, because for me, didn't work out for me. And that's where I went back to animal science.
No, that's great though. Again, that you're that resource, that you could be that resource for her, and hopefully other people will listen to this and can use you as a resource, and that those students that you're seeing when you go to that event, that STEM day, will continue to use you as a resource. That's great. I mean, that's, you're, actually making a tangible impact, a positive impact. So that's great.
We always need more animal scientists.
That's right. There's no shortage of openings and positions for people. We need, capable people to fill them. So,
and if you are interested in vet school, please do so. We do have a large shortage there.
Yes, we have a large shortage of veterinarians. My husband, he also started out as pre-vet, but like many people do, like we've talked about, he changed his mind. Although he does come from a family of veterinarians. His mom is a veterinarian. My mother-in-law is a veterinarian. And then actually his youngest sister is finishing. She will graduate she'll graduate from vet school from Ohio State's vet program this, next May. So she's in her final year of that. So shout out to Hunter. But yeah, so some people say that's going to be their thing and it's their calling and they stay with it. And some people find something else, but we definitely do need more veterinarians, definitely rural veterinarians. That shortage is really quite sad. So
it's time for our famous 3. Data shows most cattle don't get the vitamin D they need. especially in winter months. High D from DSM Firmenich can ensure your cattle get the recommended vitamin D level to support bone strength, help immunity, and improve performance. Visit dsm.com/HY-D to learn more.
Well, in terms of our questions, we are coming to the end of our interview. And I prepped you for these a little bit earlier, so hopefully you've had a chance to think about it. But we ask these same questions of every guest on every podcast show we do. So the first one is, what is your favorite beef or cattle-related book or resource?
Currently, it has been the Ag Guide, the 4th edition that you can find online and print yourself or ask, has just really the basics of any production. And I say this because 75% of my questions that I get, call-ins, if I don't know the answer right off the top of my head, I refer to the Ag Guide and find the answer and can get back to them. And also, I love that it's a free online source that I can send to them if they want to have it too.
Free and online are both and easily shareable. Those are all, those check all the boxes. That's good. Okay, so changing direction a bit, what is a book related, or what is a book that is not related to beef or cows that you are currently reading? Or if you're not reading something right now, what is just your favorite non-beef or cattle book?
I'm going to say this one because I'm a little disappointed. It took me to be 25 years old a couple years ago when I finally read them and have fallen in love, and it's the Harry Potter series.
That's good. Have you read the whole thing? All of them?
Not quite. I haven't read all of them yet, but I will say that I've already watched all 7 of the movies 2 times this month because it's the season, I feel like. And there are 7 movies for a movie a day.
One movie a night. That's right.
Yep.
That's great. I have not read any of the Harry Potter books. However, my cousin's son is, I mean, he's like, let's see, so he's 12, or he's 12, and he is really into them. And the Harry Potter series, or the publishers or whatever, are coming out with like brand new editions of each one's, like big, heavy, like illustrated hardcover ones, like illustrated versions. And so I really enjoyed buying those for him because I love reading, and I just not a big, haven't really gotten into Harry Potter, but I love buying like those big heavy books for him. And so I am seeing that those are having I don't think they were ever not popular, but they're having like a resurgence.
Oh, that's cool.
New editions and stuff like that. And you're right. It does feel like it's an appropriate time to watch the movies because it does feel like it's like spooky season.
It's like going back to school, and he's going back to Hogwarts, and then spooky season. Yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect. Okay. And so our final wrap-up question is, when you think of someone you admire, what is a trait they have that has made them successful?
I really love people who can walk into a room and make a friend anywhere and can capture the room without even trying. And 2 people specifically that I really admire and have really prepared me for the job that I'm in now is Trent Gilbury from NDSU and my current mentor with Penn State Extension, Tara Felix. They both very different personalities, but both can walk into a room and have made friends with everybody. And I always look up to them and think, I still to this day, even, Trent, who was my boss as an undergrad, sometimes think back, how would Trent handle this, or talk about this situation and things like that. And I really admire that and hope that even though I'm a young educator, I have a lot of time to grow and become those things. So
that's definitely a trait. Some people I feel like are just born like with that. They can just walk in anxiety free and walk up to someone and just strike up a conversation. And I think that's definitely something, that's really admirable. So, well, thank you for sharing that with us, and shout out to your 2 mentors on the podcast. So that is sadly all the time we have for today. Thank you, Taylor, so much for joining us and sharing us about your upbringing and your career path through cows and poultry, and then on to helping dairy producers transition to raising beef cattle. It's been very interesting. I know that I have learned a lot this episode, so thank you for that. Again, so thank you for being here on the Beef Podcast Show with us. If people want to find out more information about what you do or get in contact with you or follow you, where can they do that?
They can email me at T as in Taylor, B as in boy, Z as in zebra, 5162 at psu.edu.
Okay. That's TBZ5162 at psu.edu. I am putting that in our show notes for our listeners. So if you want to check out, if you have a question for Taylor or want to email her or have a thought later, feel free to do that. Again, Taylor, thank you so much for being on the show with us today. I hope you have a great, wonderful fall and transitioning into winter, which will probably be at your doorstep before it is at mine. And to our audience, thank you for listening, for joining us, and we hope that you will join us next week on the Beef Podcast Show.